Hello everyone, Shinto Bean here with some more Warhammer combat cards. In this video I'm not going to play a game, I'm just going to be talking about one faction, which is the Tyranids. Now the Tyranids, I really like the faction and I want to like playing as them, but the sad truth is that they're just not really all that fun, nor are a lot of the cards very good, and I'm going to tell you why I think so. Now I was looking at the notes for the next season balance changes, and a number of melee Tyranids are actually getting a pretty significant buff, including Old One Eye, who's getting a plus 15 melee attack, so that's actually pretty big. But it's still not enough to address a lot of the issues with Tyranids at the moment, so let me know what you think about the Tyranids here, but I'll go ahead and give you my opinion here. So let's start off with the Warlords. First of all, the newest Tyranid Warlord is the Jackal Alphas. Now this is actually a pretty good ranged option. It has pretty good stats. Deadshot is an amazing trait. That's not it. There it is. So you can use that to focus down the enemy Warlord. It's a lot of fun when it goes off, and it's not that hard to use. And then the special rule is pretty decent. It's sometimes a little bit hit or miss depending on how big of a ranged attack you have charged up, but overall it's a pretty solid option. The only issue I have personally with the Jackal Alphas is that the animation for the special rule is a little bit too slow. It's unnecessarily slow. And they have sped it up recently, but it still could be a little bit faster. And next up, my personal favorite Tyranid Warlord is probably Gosar. He's quite fun, but he does have very low health considering his cost. So once he arrives on the field, unless he can kill the enemy Warlord in one hit, he's going to be in trouble, most likely. And the special rule, while it's fun, it kind of pales in comparison to a lot of the other special rules out there. So at the higher ranks, I don't think Gosar is a very good option. Skipping around, let's look at the Hive Tyrant. This one starts off pretty strong, I think, for lower ranking players, but again, it's special rule, 15 damage each turn to a random enemy. It's really not that amazing, and its high points cost means you can't actually bring a whole lot of bodyguards. Then we got the Swarmlord. The Swarmlord is a very cool looking model, very awesome stats on the Warlord itself, but the problem is its special rule is kind of bad. I mean, considering how many ways there are to counter, I mean, there are a lot of cards out there with like Outflank or Scout that can, buff the unit's attack stats even after it's been debuffed by this special rule. It's really not going to do very much to protect your units. That's my issue with the Swarmlord. Which leaves us with the best Tyranid Warlord, and that is the Turvagon. This thing is actually really good, and its special rule is amazing, giving you infinite termagants, but the only issue is that the games can take a little bit longer since you're relying on those weak termagants to do a lot of the damage, and also there are warlords out there who benefit from killing the termagants over and over again, so you do have to watch out for those. So those are the warlords. Now let's take a look at the bodyguards. Now this is where I think some of the big issues occur. So they have a whole lot of really cheap fodder units, but a lot of them are pretty much useless. Let's take a look at why that is the case. Now they have a number of endless units, and that is very lore appropriate, I think. The Hormigaunt, the Gene Stealer here, the Ripper Swarm, and then we've got the Gargoyles. All of these are endless. The problem is there is not a single Tyranid Warlord that actually combos with endless cards, unlike some of the other factions. So that's really the only time I use cheap endless cards, is when they combo with the Warlord. So that is something that the Tyranids are sorely lacking, so I never use any of those cards. This one, they have a bunch of cheap Gene Stealers as well. This thing has melee Scout, so I mean it's pretty good considering it's 4 points, but its attack stats are pretty terrible, so I mean I'll use it if I just have a few leftover points. Now we've got this cheap one with Fear. Again, low health bodyguard with Fear. It's not going to do a whole lot. We've got this guy, again, pretty low attack stats. Outflank is not bad, but I have not found that I really use that guy at all. This is one of the best cards. simply because of its outstanding attack power. I mean, this thing just hits like a truck with Big Game Hunter, so at 5 points, definitely worth using, especially with Gosar. Compare that, though, with the ranged option, which also has Big Game Hunter. This thing does a maximum of 35 damage at max level. I don't know why it is so different than this one, but yeah, this card is just pretty useless, in my opinion. We've got this guy with a Furious Charge, again, pretty low attack stats, really not worth the amount of coins I've invested to upgrade it. I've got the Muculid Spore. This thing has Death Blow. It's okay, I guess, if you combine it with Gosar. We've got this guy, another melee scout. The problem with this one is that it has a lot of health and very low damage. So low damage and only one attack type, not really a great combo. Next up, this thing is definitely a very valuable card. Medicae on a cheap unit is extremely useful, so Biophagus definitely worth using in most decks. We've got this guy with Inspiring Presence. This is a pretty decent option, I think, if you're going for a ranged deck. Cheap Inspiring Presence, not bad. And we're getting into the 10 plus points here now. The Keller Morph does a pretty good amount of damage, but it does have target acquired, which can be situational, not always helpful in all situations, so it's a little bit risky using that guy. The Sanctus, I do like. I mean, it's got 2 attack types and poison. It doesn't really have enough health to survive for very long, though, so you may or may not get very much out of that guy. Tyranids have a number of Psychers, and the Psychers are pretty good, but they don't have any super strong Psychic Bodyguards. We can just look at all the Psychers right now. We got the Zoanthrope with Psychic Link, also this Magus, and let's see, the Neurothrope. All 3 of these guys have Psychic Link, and the Magus and Neurothrope can deal quite a bit of damage at the higher levels, so they do have some pretty good damage output. They don't have a huge amount of health, though. Let's see, moving on, we have got the Venom Throat. Now, this thing has been buffed quite a few times. It actually has pretty impressive starting melee attack now. It used to be much weaker, and it's actually going to get buffed again next season. So for 13 points, this is actually pretty good. You're getting a lot of bang for your buck there. The Lictor, and now this thing used to have melee scout, but they switched it to target acquired. Ever since then, I stopped using it, again, because it's just very situational, and only 1 attack type. It's really not that great. This thing is also going to be getting additional stats next season, but we'll see if anyone uses it. Moving on, we've got a few ranged units in here. We've got 2 units of Barrage, the Hive Guard and the Biovore. The Biovore is definitely the better option because of its weak melee attack. It can be useful when counter-attacking. The Hive Guard has a little more health, but only 1 attack type and a pretty low damage output, so it's really not a great card. This thing, the Tyrant card with Taunt, this used to be pretty bad, and it wasn't until 2 years into the game that they finally decided to give it a huge buff. They lowered its points cost, increased its health and damage, so now it's actually not terrible. This is a newer card, the Heavy Weapons team with Big Game Hunter. This is, again, good because it has pretty good damage output, and it has a lot of damage upgrades, so it can actually do its job correctly. We've got this Magus with Poison, Psychic attack is its main attack type, and she is, I mean, I tend to use her with a Psychic deck because you kind of have to use all the Psychers if you want to fill up the deck points. She's okay, I guess. We've got some melee Berserkers here. This guy, the Aberrant, has gone through a couple of different iterations. So we got that guy and the stronger version here, the Abominant. These guys are not too bad, but again, Berserkers with 1 attack type are not nearly as good as the ones with both ranged and melee attack. Then we've got this Tyranid Warrior. It's the ranged one with Precision Shot. It is splitting its attack types between ranged and melee, so it's not a super strong ranged unit. It has a surprisingly large health pool for some reason. I don't know why. So there's that one. We've got the other Tyranid Warrior. This one has a lot less health for some reason, even though it's the melee one. It's kind of a glass cannon that does a lot of melee attack and has poison. It's a fun one to use, but again, its low health means it doesn't survive for very long. We've got this card, the Death Leaper. This used to be a limited edition card. Just recently got it to level 3. Yeah, at the lower levels it's kind of terrible. I guess as you upgrade it, it gets a little bit better. Although Outflank is perhaps not the best trait for something like that. Let's see, now we're getting to the big ones. Now the big cards are actually pretty fun. I do like a lot of these guys. The Ridge Runner is one of the newer ranged vehicles with Ranged Scout. This thing is actually quite good when combined with the Jackal Alphas. But Tyranids just are kind of lacking decent ranged units overall, and especially if you look in this mid-tier, they don't have a lot of great options for like mid-costing units compared to the other factions. So that's something that they could really, work on, adding more units in that area. Up at the top tier, a lot of these really big monsters are primarily melee only units, and again, decks that go only melee tend to not fare so well in the upper levels of ranked. But let's take a look. We've got the Haruspex. This thing has regeneration. It's a pretty fun one to use. Does quite a bit of damage when upgraded. And actually, it used to be 40 points, making it a target for Big Game Hunter, but it was decreased to 39, so it is no longer big game. So that's a solid one with Gosar. We've got the Hive Crone. This thing is a glass cannon. It doesn't have a whole lot of health for its cost, and it does a lot of damage, but again, splitting those attack types between ranged and melee, so it kind of is confusing what its role is supposed to be. Now we've got the Tyrannosite. This thing had its trait changed, I think, from Outflank to Regeneration, so this thing is very tanky. It's an interesting card. I haven't really used it very much yet, though. It is quite expensive. We've got the Maliceptor. This thing is kind of like a weaker Lord of Change, but it is quite a bit weaker. It doesn't have a very strong psychic attack. Sonic Blast is a very powerful trait. It has a decent amount of health and a melee attack as well, but again, if it had just a little more psychic damage, it would actually be quite a bit better. As it stands, it's not a huge, super powerful card. The Exocrine is by far the strongest ranged unit, and this thing, if you're going ranged, you definitely want to have this one. It's got shields, so it's extremely durable, and has impressive damage output. Old One Eye, again, has been pretty bad historically. He just does not deal very much damage to start off with. It's not till level 5 that he gets his first damage upgrade. But again, he is getting plus 15 melee stats next season, so he'll be a little bit better, although still quite expensive for a mono attacker. We've also got the Hive Tyrant with Inspiring Presence. This thing is another expensive card, which doesn't deal a huge amount of damage. It's kind of an odd one, having, melee and a weak psychic attack. So I haven't really used this guy very much. We've got the Carnifex. This thing is kind of bad because it has Death Blow and a pretty weak melee attack for its cost, so you're just not getting very much out of it considering its high cost. And yeah, I just don't really use the Carnifex. And then finally, the most expensive unit is the Moloch. This thing is the big melee monster, deals massive amounts of damage, and it's got Death Blow. It can be quite fun to see that Death Blow go off, but the problem with these expensive units with Death Blow is that a lot of times they don't actually die, which means you get nothing out of the trait. So it's really not the most amazing. I do like to use this thing with Gosar, obviously, but again, not really the best selection of units overall. And there's definitely room for more especially in the midsection, like I said, to fill out, you know, provide some additional options. Also something that could better utilize these weak units. I think it's fine to keep them the way that they are as long as there's a Warlord that can actually combo with like these endless cards. Give us an actual reason to use them. And yeah, I mean, the big cards are pretty fun. I think there's really only so much you can do with these giant, you know, Tyranid monsters that focus on their, you know, melee attacks. But maybe improving some of these Warlords as well, like Gosar, making him a little bit more impactful for higher ranking players, as well as I personally would like to see the Swarmlord special rule changed to something more interesting. I find it pretty boring to play as, but that is my 2 cents, or quite a bit more than 2 cents actually there. A lot of complaints that I've been, you know, saving up all this time for the Tyranids. Again, big fan of, you know, the faction and the models, but just kind of frustrated with how bad a lot of the cards are. So that's what I think about the Tyranids. Let me know what you think, if you agree with the stuff that I said, and what you think might improve the faction as a whole. Let me know in the comments. If you made it this far, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.